Decisions. What's the right grill for the job? Well, today, game plan is to see if the Kamado Joe Jr. is the perfect tool for reverse searing my first ever Wagyu picanha. Let's fire it up. Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue. And when I shared last week's massive tomahawk ribeye that we reverse seared on the Kamado Joe Kettle Joe, my inbox has been filling up with questions around, James, what would you have as a great entry point into the Kamado Joe lineup? The $3.99 USD Kamado Joe Jr., which I'm a huge fan of, or the $4.99 new Kettle Joe? And this is a great question. And so while I'm not going to do a full comparative review today, let me know in the comments if that's something that you'd like to see and we'll make it happen. But you did get me thinking, as much as I love my Joe Jr., it's just not as well suited for those long, big, low and slow cooks like a brisket, as I'll illustrate here with a relatively small 14-pound Packer brisket trying to fit on the Joe Jr., whereas the Kettle Joe at 22 inches just swallows this up. I did my first overnight brisket on the Kettle Joe and the results blew me away. It was one of my top 5 briskets ever that I've cooked for sure. It was a real winner. So that being said, I was a little bit surprised at the difficulty I encountered going from low and slow on the Kettle Joe using the slow roller to changing gears to hot and fast. And that's largely because your slow roller gets really hot and there's just not space to put things as you want to try and navigate these hot components and lower the dome to go into direct grilling mode. So today, I'm just gonna focus on the Joe Jr. and see how it performs when we wanna change gears from indirect mode for reverse searing my first Wagyu picanha to then going inferno mode for a hot and fast sear. Let's get ready to fire it up. So like the Kettle Joe, the Joe Jr. actually doesn't have any side shelves that can support its hot accessories either, but based on its small footprint, I think it'll be a little bit easier to manage taking out the heat deflector plate. So to get ready for cooking, what we're gonna do is just go ahead, add a little bit more charcoal, fire that up until we see those coals ashing over. You start to see some of that white ash. We know we've got good clean combustion. We'll drop in our accessory rack, install our heat deflector plate, and then I'm gonna use the Kamado Joe sear plate for today's cook. That's gonna do a couple things by installing it now. One, it'll pre-warm so we get that cast iron a little bit of heat while we're doing our reverse sear portion, nice and low and slow, maybe around 250 to 270 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we can remove our heat deflector plate and go for inferno mode and blast sear our Wagyu picanha over some direct heat. That's the game plan. Let's let the grill come up to temperature and I'll see you in a couple minutes. Okay, so for seasoning, I'm gonna keep things pretty straightforward. Just got a little bit of Diamond Kosher crystal salt, some fresh cracked black pepper, and then I'm gonna go ahead and use a meter probe just so we can track this. This is a smaller steak. I think it'll cook pretty quickly. So I'm gonna set that to notify me at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll take you fast forward while we season both sides. All right, our Kamado Joe Jr. has just come up to just below 250 degrees on the dome. And so I'm gonna go ahead now and slide the bottom draft door down to 1 finger. And if you're using the smokeware cap, you wanna go to about 1/4 inch or so for 250 degrees. And if you're using the daisy wheel, you're looking for anywhere between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch visible in between each of those pedestals. So now that we're up to temperature, we're stabilized, our grill's passing the hand test, if you haven't heard that before, for about 250 degrees. Should be nice and warm, but you can hold that there for 5-10 seconds without it starting to feel like it's burning. If you're not getting any heat, wait a little bit longer, your dome's not up to temperature. And if it's scalding hot, go ahead and make sure you do adjust those vents quite quickly, as that is likely a little bit warmer than what you want. So let's get our picanha on and reverse sear, and we'll follow along on our meter app to know when we're getting ready to change into inferno mode. All right, our steak is racing towards that first milestone of 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So I took the opportunity, once I saw 90 degrees Fahrenheit on the internal temperature, that's usually about halfway. So I went and flipped that steak just so we get nice, even doneness on both sides. But now that we're about at that 110 mark, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this off and just set it aside so that it can rest and carry over cook while we go ahead, open up our Kamado Joe Jr., remove that heat deflector plate, open our bottom vent all the way as well as our top vent so we can achieve inferno mode for searing temperatures. Take a fast forward while we set everything up. All right, that part went fast. I think once we are up to about 750 degrees, we are no more than 10 seconds per side before alternating directions, flipping and repeating, and we got a perfect crust. Slicing into this, I was a little bit nervous how thin the steak was, that it might overcook and lose some of that edge to edge medium rare, but it looked exactly on point. So glad that we pulled the steak when we did, because it continued to carry over cook about another 10 degrees or so while it was resting on the cutting board. Anyways, enough chit chat. I am dying to try my first Wagyu picanha. Let's go ahead and dig in for our taste test. So I don't know if that's coming through on camera or not, but we've got great crust, perfect edge to edge medium rare. Let's go ahead and dig in. I don't even know what to say. That is really good. So I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Wagyu. I sometimes find it's way too overpriced for what you get. This steak was under $30. Now it's small, but it's about the right amount when it comes to Wagyu because it's so rich. And so just first thing that hit my mouth is the texture of our crust. We got great crust, a little bit of salt and pepper, and then there was just an explosion of that beef flavor as we got into the Wagyu, and it just saturated our tongue with butter. It was incredible. I'm gonna do another piece. Sorry, back to fast forward. It was wise of me to take the steak in and only give myself 3 pieces, because otherwise I think you'd be fast forward while I just destroyed that entire steak. That is incredible. That's not what today's video was all about. Today's video was also about putting the Joe Jr. through its paces, especially given my experience on the Kettle Joe last week trying to reverse sear that tomahawk. So how did it do? Well, as you saw, it was pretty quick and easy just to go ahead and lift out the accessory rack along with a heat shield and drop in our cast iron directly above those coals. One of the things I love about the Joe Jr. is its sportiness. You go from low and slow to 750 degrees. That was, I'm not even sure if it was 10 minutes. It picks up temperature quick and we are ready to hit our blast sear in inferno mode. And so for cooks like today, it just reminds me why I love the Joe Jr. so much. If you were doing this midweek, this is absolutely the type of cook and the grill that can fit into your dinner schedule with no planning. You're up to temperature for cooking, you're up to temperature for searing. I think in the same time that you would be, on propane, not that you could hit those kind of crazy temperatures. So I definitely think this head-to-head needs to happen. Let me know in the comments. Do you want to see that Joe Jr. versus the Kettle Joe in the sub $500? What's the best entry into the Kamado Joe grill space? I'd be more than happy to share my thoughts as well as answer some of your questions. Let me know, and again, in the comments if you want to see that happen. Anyways, that's enough for today. Let me know if you like this video by smashing that thumbs up button and hit subscribe to catch future videos, especially if you want to see that head-to-head. For now, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.